My brother isn't the dramatic type, if anything, he's the opposite. Quiet. Careful with words. The kind of person who takes a long pause before answering even simple questions, like he's measuring the weight of every sentence before letting it leave his mouth. Growing up, he was the one who kept things stable. When I got into trouble at school, he handled it. When our parents argued, he pulled me into another room and turned the TV up louder. So when someone like that suddenly asks if you're sure about marrying the person you love, it lands differently, but I ignored it, partly because it was easier, and partly because, at that point, my entire life was already pointed in one direction. The wedding was 4 days away, our apartment was full of unopened boxes of decorations. My fiancée had spent the whole afternoon on the phone with the venue about seating arrangements and flowers. My phone buzzed every hour with another relative asking about directions or hotel rooms. Everything was moving forward too fast to stop and question anything, and if I'm being honest, I didn't want to question it, because the woman I was about to marry had become the calmest part of my life. She was thoughtful in quiet ways. Leaving coffee ready before I woke up. Remembering the weird foods I liked. Resting her hand on my shoulder during conversations like she was anchoring herself there. Being with her felt steady, safe, which is why my brother's question didn't feel like a warning, it just felt out of place, like a sentence from the wrong conversation. When people asked how we met, the story always sounded simple, too simple. Maybe we ran into each other at a mutual friend's small gathering about 3 years earlier. Nothing dramatic. No movie-style moment where the room stopped or music started playing. She was sitting on the floor near the couch, flipping through a stack of old vinyl records someone had brought. I remember noticing how focused she looked, like the rest of the room barely existed. At one point she held up an album and asked, "Is this actually good, or are people just pretending to like it?" That was the first thing she ever said to me. It made me laugh because she didn't seem like someone trying to impress anyone. We talked the rest of the night. Mostly small things. Music, old movies, the strange way some people can't stand silence. There was something calming about her. Not exciting in a loud way. More like comfortable, the kind of presence that lowers the volume in your head. A few weeks later we started seeing each other regularly. Coffee shops, late walks, long conversations that drifted between random topics. She wasn't the kind of person who overshared. In fact, she avoided talking about her past most of the time. At the beginning, I assumed it was just personality. Some people live in the present and don't dig around in old memories, and honestly, I respected that. My brother, however, noticed something else. About 6 months into the relationship, after he met her for the first time, he pulled me aside and said something strange. "Seems nice," he said slowly, then he added, almost as an afterthought, "She's careful with what she tells people." At the time, it sounded like an observation, not a warning. At the time, I didn't think much about what my brother said. She's careful with what she tells people. Honestly, that description could apply to a lot of people. Especially people who don't like being the center of attention, and my fiancée definitely wasn't that type. If we were in a group, she preferred listening. She'd smile, nod, ask small questions that kept other people talking. Most of my friends liked her immediately because she made conversations feel easy, but if someone turned the focus onto her, asking about where she grew up, old jobs, old relationships, she had this subtle way of redirecting things. Not in an obvious way, she'd answer just enough to satisfy the question. Then smoothly pivot to something else. I noticed it once during dinner with my brother. He asked where she went to school. She paused just a fraction of a second before answering. "A small one," she said with a smile. Nothing exciting. Then she immediately asked him about his work. The shift was so smooth the conversation moved on before anyone thought twice, except my brother. I remember glancing at him across the table. He was watching her, not suspicious exactly, but focused. Like someone listening for a faint sound behind a wall. Later that night he asked me another question. "Do you know much about her life before you met?" I shrugged. Enough. He didn't argue. He didn't push, he just gave a small nod and said, "All right." At the time, I interpreted that as acceptance. What I didn't realize was that my brother had already started looking into something, and he hadn't told me yet. About a year into the relationship, my brother brought it up again, not aggressively. Just one of those quiet moments when the room feels a little too still. we were sitting on his balcony late at night, the kind of slow evening where conversation drifts between random topics. Work, money, the usual stuff. Then he asked, casually, you ever meet any of her old friends? I shook my head. She moved around a lot, I said. Doesn't really stay in touch with people. That answer sounded normal to me. Plenty of people drift away from old circles, but my brother stayed quiet longer than usual. You ever find that strange? He asked. I leaned back in the chair and laughed a little. Not really. He looked out across the street lights for a while before speaking again. I'm not saying there's something wrong, he said carefully. Just. Sometimes when people keep their past vague, there's usually a reason. That sentence annoyed me more than I expected. It felt unfair. She's not hiding anything, I said. She just doesn't like talking about old stuff. My brother nodded slowly. All right. That was the thing about him. He never pushed arguments once he realized someone had already made up their mind. Instead, he just filed things away quietly, and for a long time after that conversation, he stopped bringing it up entirely, which made me assume he dropped the whole concern. Looking back now, I think that's the moment he decided something else, not to argue with me, but to find the answer himself. By the time the wedding week arrived, my brother hadn't mentioned any of it in almost a year. No strange questions, no quiet warnings. If anything, he seemed normal again. He helped me move boxes into the car the day before the rehearsal dinner. He carried chairs, organized decorations, even joked about how ridiculous wedding traditions were. It felt like everything had settled, which is why that conversation in my kitchen 3 days before the wedding caught me so off guard. Are you absolutely sure you want to marry her? After he said it, the room went quiet. I tried to laugh it off. You've met her like 100 times, I said. It's not exactly a mystery. He didn't smile. Instead he stared down at the coffee mug in his hands like he was deciding something. Then he said that sentence, just. Make sure you really know who she is. And then he stood up, conversation over, no explanation. I remember watching him walk out of the kitchen feeling slightly irritated. Not scared. Not suspicious, just annoyed, because wedding week is chaos already. The last thing anyone wants is vague warnings with no details. Later that night, I told my fiancée about it while we were folding table place cards at the dining table. She listened quietly, then she gave a small, understanding smile. Older brothers worry, she said softly, and she reached across the table, squeezing my hand, especially when they think someone might take their little brother away. At the time, that explanation made perfect sense, so I accepted it. What I didn't know was that my brother had almost told me the truth that night, almost, and something stopped him. The rehearsal dinner was the first time I realized something was still off, not with my fiancée, with my brother. He showed up early, like he always does for everything. Quietly helping move chairs, checking with the restaurant staff about the seating layout, doing small tasks no one else noticed. But he wasn't relaxed. I've known him my entire life, and there's a certain look he gets when something is sitting heavy in his head. His attention drifts. His responses come a second too late. He had that look all evening. At one point he asked if we could step outside for a minute. We stood near the back entrance of the restaurant. Cold air, muffled voices coming from inside, the low hum of traffic somewhere down the street. He rubbed his hands together like he was warming them. I need to ask you something, he said. The tone in his voice immediately made me tense up. What? He hesitated. For a moment I thought he was actually going to say it. Whatever it was he'd been holding back for years. Instead, he asked something strange. Have you ever tried looking her up? Looking her up how? I asked. Old records. Schools. Stuff like that. I frowned. No, why would I do that? Another pause, then he shook his head like he'd talked himself out of something. Never mind, he said quietly. Forget I asked. And just like that, he walked back inside, leaving me standing there with a question that didn't make sense yet. But later that night, something happened that made his question feel a lot more serious. A few days later, a family friend pulled me aside at the bachelor party. She whispered something in my ear that made my stomach twist. Apparently, years ago, my fiancé had been involved in some trouble in another city. Something vague, rumors about shady business dealings, disappearing coworkers, people talking, but no clear facts. I felt my hands tighten around the glass I was holding. I couldn't believe it, for the next hour, I kept replaying every interaction I'd ever had with her. Every small smile, every quiet gesture. How could she have hidden that? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, not at the story itself, not even at the vague details, but at her for keeping me in the dark. When I confronted my brother later that night, I expected him to confirm it. I expected him to say, "I told you so," or to nod solemnly and explain he'd known all along. Instead, he just looked at me with that unreadable expression of his. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure," he said slowly. "I didn't know if it mattered, or if it was even true." At that moment, my anger shifted. Part of me felt betrayed by her. But another, quieter part wondered if I had been too quick to judge. I started to question everything I thought I knew about her, about my brother, about the wedding itself. The more I tried to piece it together, the more tangled it all became, and the truth. The story that everyone seemed to hint at. It turned out to be just the first layer of something far more complicated. Even after that night, I told myself I was overreacting, but something kept gnawing at me. It wasn't the vague rumors or the whispers from friends. It was one tiny, almost imperceptible detail I couldn't ignore, a message I accidentally saw on her phone, just a fragment really, a half-finished text to someone named M that mentioned moving cities abruptly. Nothing scandalous. Nothing concrete. But the timing didn't add up with the story I'd heard. I tried to dismiss it at first. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it, but the more I replayed our life together, the more it stood out. Small inconsistencies. A missing explanation here. A vague memory there. Like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit the picture I had in my head. The thing that really got under my skin was that she never lied. Not really. She just omitted things. Avoided answering in detail. Deflected questions without explanation, and yet, every time I tried to press her gently about the past, she would smile, shake her head, and say, "Why dig up the past? Isn't the present enough?" I wanted to believe her. I really did, but that fragment, the timing, the message, the little evasions, made me doubt everything I thought I knew. I found myself staring at her, asking in my head if the calm, safe love I felt was built on something fragile, and that's when I realized, my brother might not have been overprotective or jealous, he might have been seeing pieces of the puzzle I hadn't even noticed yet. It was late, well past midnight, when my brother called me. I wasn't expecting him, but there he was, standing at my apartment door, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, eyes sharper than I'd ever seen. He didn't knock. He didn't say hello. He just said, "We need to talk. Now." I led him inside, still groggy from the day's chaos. Wedding prep, final decorations, last-minute family calls, my mind was a mess, but his tone cut through all of it like a knife. He sat down on the couch and waited for me to speak. I stared back, unsure if I wanted to hear what he had to say. Finally, he exhaled and began. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. "The rumors. The stories. They're all wrong. Or at least misleading." I felt my chest tighten. Misleading? That only made it worse. He paused, looking at me like he'd been holding something in for years. "The truth is," he continued, "I found out something about her long before you met her. Something she's kept from everyone. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure how to, and I didn't want to ruin your life over guesses. But the rumors you heard, the warnings, they made you doubt her, and you never asked me why I was worried." I sat there, stunned. My mind raced. Questions piled up, but his gaze demanded I listen first. For the first time, I realized my brother hadn't been jealous. He had been trying to protect me, and the truth about her, the part she'd hidden, was far more complicated than I could have imagined. He leaned back, finally letting some of the tension slip from his shoulders, though his eyes never left mine. "You remember when I said she was careful about what she told people?" he asked. I nodded. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I didn't know the full story at the time," he said. "I just noticed things that didn't add up. Small things. Gaps in records, people who refused to talk about her. Places she lived with no official trace. At first, I thought maybe it was nothing. But over the years, I kept noticing patterns. He paused, staring at his hands. I started checking. Quietly. Online, public records, old acquaintances. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. And eventually, I found something. Something serious. What? What did you find? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head. I can't even describe it in a simple sentence. It's not about crime or fraud. It's complicated. Something in her past that could have changed everything for you, maybe ruined you if you'd found out the wrong way. It explained why she moved so much, why she avoids questions about her history. I swallowed hard, trying to imagine the weight of carrying secrets like that for years, and that's why I warned you before the wedding, he said quietly. Not because I wanted to control you. But because I didn't want you walking blindly into something you didn't understand. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls themselves were pressing in. I realized then that the woman I thought I knew, and the brother I thought I understood, were both holding parts of the truth I had never seen. The next morning, I asked her to sit with me. We were in the apartment, sunlight spilling across the living room floor, folding laundry I hadn't had the energy to touch for days. I couldn't look at her and not see the cracks I'd been ignoring. Can we talk? I asked quietly. She nodded, her hands stilling in her lap. I know something about your past. Or at least parts I've pieced together, I said, feeling my voice wobble. I need to understand. I can't marry you if there are secrets between us. She stayed silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the floor. Then she took a deep breath. I didn't tell you because I wanted to protect you, she said softly. There were things. Mistakes, people I got involved with. Things I had to leave behind to survive. I never thought they would matter to you. I never thought anyone would even care to know. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke, folding over each other. I moved cities. Changed jobs. Built a life that didn't exist before. I wanted to start over, not be haunted by what I couldn't control. I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that it wasn't what the rumors implied, anger that she hadn't told me sooner. I wish you told me, I said quietly. Even a hint. She looked up, tears in her eyes. I wanted to. I was afraid. I didn't want to lose you before I had a chance to show you who I really am. And for the first time, I realized the whole situation wasn't about betrayal or secrets, it was about trust, timing, and fear. We sat across from each other in silence for what felt like hours. I kept thinking about my brother's warnings, the fragments I'd seen, the rumors that made my blood boil. And now, looking at her, I realized none of it was straightforward. None of it was simple. I don't know if I can just move past this, I said finally, my voice hollow. I've spent months thinking I knew everything about you. But there's this. This other life I didn't see. She flinched, but not in shame, more in sadness. I never asked you to know everything. I only asked you to trust me. Her words hit me like a punch. I wanted to feel anger, but instead it was confusion. Part of me wanted to forgive, another part couldn't stop questioning whether I really knew her at all. Do you understand why my brother was worried? I asked. She looked down, and I swear my heart broke a little. I think I do now. And I wish I could go back and tell you everything sooner. But some things. You only understand after you're ready to listen. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. I wanted clarity, but all I felt was a storm of doubt. In that moment, I realized the truth wasn't simple. She hadn't lied exactly, but she had hidden the past. My brother hadn't been overprotective, he had been trying to shield me, and in the middle of the room, with the wedding a few days away, I realized I had no idea what the right choice was. Could I trust her? Or had trust already been broken before it even began? The days after that conversation were unbearable. I went through the motions of wedding prep, but every smile, every handshake, every RSVP felt hollow. I kept seeing my brother's quiet warnings in my mind, the way he'd rub the back of his neck like he was carrying a weight I couldn't lift. My fiancée tried to be patient, tried to reassure me. She left little notes, small apologies, reminders that she loved me, but even those gestures felt like echoes of something I couldn't reach anymore. Family members started asking questions. Nervous? Excited? Everything ready? I answered politely, but inside I was wrestling with a storm of doubt and guilt. I spoke to my brother a few times. But he wouldn't push. He only said, "It's your choice. I told you what I knew." And he left it at that. The burden of decision was mine. Every night, I replayed everything, the fragments, the half-truths, the quiet moments of fear in her eyes. I thought about what it meant to truly know someone. Did love mean accepting the past, no matter how messy? Or did it mean being fully informed before making a lifelong commitment? I began to avoid her for hours at a time, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that the life we had built might be based on a foundation I couldn't trust, and yet, part of me wanted to move forward. To believe in the person I had loved for years, but the shadow of secrets, and my brother's warnings, hovered over everything. Even when I tried to laugh, even when I tried to focus on small joys, the doubt lingered, because the truth isn't always about what's hidden. Sometimes it's about whether you can live with what you finally discover. The wedding day came, but it didn't feel like a day. It felt like walking through fog, each step heavy, each smile forced. I watched my fiancée laugh with friends, her hair catching the sunlight just so, and part of me wanted to step forward and hold her hand and pretend everything was normal. Part of me needed to, but another part, the cautious, fearful part my brother had been trying to protect, held me back. I remembered his words in the kitchen, his quiet nods over the years, the way he almost spoke but didn't. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't petty. He had seen something I couldn't yet understand, something about her past that made him hesitate for my sake. I kept asking myself the same question. Over and over, could I marry her knowing everything I now knew? Could I fully trust someone who had hidden a past not out of malice, but out of fear? She hadn't lied in the way most people imagine, she had only protected herself, protected me, perhaps. And yet, the weight of that protection made it feel like a wall between us. I walked down the aisle, smiled, and said the words everyone expected. I held her hand, and I meant it, but part of my mind lingered on the questions I couldn't answer. Years later, I still think about that moment. About trust, secrets, and protection, and I still wonder, was she wrong for hiding her past, or was my brother wrong for exposing it, because sometimes love and loyalty don't align neatly. And the hardest choice is knowing the difference too late.